But when I was 17, my life changed. And I think after I look back on it, it was probably, it was a change for the better in many ways. It was Greensboro High School at the time. I came here when I was a senior. I left Dudley High School, which most of you probably know was the high school for blacks in the city. Greensboro at that time was very divided in terms of what was for blacks and what was for whites. And so we had a school system for whites and a school system for blacks. And so I went to school on the other side of town, quite a ways from here, even though I lived about 15 minutes from here. So one of the reasons they allowed me to come here was because I lived in the school district. I was not outside of the school district. So it would have been difficult to have denied the request, the application, because of that. There was another young lady who had applied at the same time. I think it was a young lady, but anyway, whoever it was denied because they were outside of the school district. So I had to make this decision whether I was going to give up all of the things that I was doing at Dudley to come here. And what I had to give up, for example, was membership in the French club, membership on the school paper. I was a radio announcer, had been since I was at J.C. Price, which was the middle school for blacks at that time. And so I had to give that up. It also meant that I would be losing close relationship with many of my friends. And I look back on it and I asked myself, how did you do that? You know, because I enjoyed my friends. We had been together, most of us, since elementary school, and some of us had met because they had been at Lincoln, I think that was the name of it, the other black middle school. So we had an opportunity to meet at Dudley. Dudley at that time had maybe 2 buildings, the main building and the gym. Grimsley had, when I got over here, all these buildings, except I think you have some new ones. And I thought, gee, that looks like a college campus. And one of the things I remembered when we were driving in, there was a community called Harristown that was not far from here. And we lived in Harristown, right on the edges of it. So I almost lived in the back of the school. And I now that I think about it, that was sort of ironic. You know, you live in the back of it and then you end up going to it. And so that, sort of brought back some memories. But I came here not knowing what to expect. And I came and I was the only African American out of approximately 2,000 students, which meant that I was by myself. And sometimes it's not bad to be by yourself because you don't have anybody to remind you of things that you shouldn't be doing. And you don't have anybody to run home and tell your mom what you did during the day that you shouldn't have done. So there were some advantages, But overall, it was a very trying time, I think, for me and for the students. They were not that receptive to my entering their space because this was their space. And for them, it was hallowed ground. And I had decided to destroy that hallowed ground. They decided that they wanted me to understand what that meant. And so for the first 2 or 3 months, there were egg showers and ketchup parties. That's what I used to call them. Because I had to make a joke out of some things. Otherwise, I would have sort of fallen to pieces. because I had to make things have different meanings for me in order to survive. One of the things that happens in situations like that is that you learn survival skills. If you learn how to take what you've been taught in church and at home and make it work for you. And you're 15, you know that's difficult because we don't like to listen to our parents. I'm saying I'm only 15, by the way. But you learn how to put in place for yourself positive survival skills, not ones that are going to be detrimental. And so I came here and nobody could tell me what to expect. As I mentioned to the other group, 1957 was a pivotal year in terms of desegregation. There had been some desegregation in 56 at Clinton, Tennessee, but you never hear anybody talk about that. And the whole issue around desegregation takes life with Little Rock, Arkansas, because it was so disruptive as far as the city was concerned. And people were very hostile towards the Little Rock Nine. And so I wasn't sure if that was going to be what faced me the first day I came. And in 1954, when the Brown versus the Board of Education decision was made, one of my teachers at J.C. Price informed me that I would not finish Dudley. And I thought it was a big joke. But 1957, on September the 4th or 5th, whenever school started, I realized it was not a big joke, that it was reality. We should have done a reality show around that. But anyway, it was reality. The first day, we had to walk from the street to the main door entrance because they wouldn't let us go in the back because they said it was not safe. I could not ride the school bus here because they felt it was not safe. And so my mother had to bring me every day. My mother was pregnant at the time. And she walked up to the door with me, and we had walked up the walkway, and there were people on both sides. And their whole thing was, nigga, go home. You don't need to be here. You're in the wrong place. And I vaguely remember this woman with this German Shepherd dog. And I wasn't sure what the dog was going to do, or what the lady was going to do. But when we got to the door, the principal said that my mother could not come in. And, that was one of the times when you want your mother to go with you somewhere. Most of the time you get to be a teenager, you don't want your mother around. But that was one time I really wanted her to come in with me, and she couldn't. And that was sort of shocking, because now I've got to come inside those doors. And the principal wasn't that inviting. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen once I got inside. And when I came in the doors, there were all these students who were yelling, go home, you in our, get out of here, get out. And during the course of the day, there was egg throwing, and the first day I went to the cafeteria, there was this ketchup episode, and so they decided that I shouldn't eat in the cafeteria. And so for a while, I had to eat lunch in the library. And that was okay because I love libraries and had worked in the library both at J.C. Price and at Dudley. So that part was okay. There were 3 young ladies who decided that what was happening was not something they were proud of. And so they took a stance and said that it was wrong what their classmates were doing. And so they formed a friendship with me during that time. And that really helped a lot. Because that meant that there was somebody who I could talk to at least. It was an interesting year, and there was only one time that I lost the presents to be patient and understanding of people whose space I was in. And I want you to understand that I'm repeating exactly what happened. A young man walked up to me and he said, "I have a message for you from my father." And I said, "What is the message?" And he said, "My father told me to tell you he fucked your mother last night." Now, first of all, if you're African American, that is a forbidden topic. You can talk about anybody, do anything, but don't talk about mama. If you saw the Malcolm X film, you remember that he went off, somebody said something about mother. And he was a little taller than I am. And I think we were up on the 3rd floor and there were some lockers there. But I do remember knocking him into the lockers. And being virtually challenged, there was only one place I could hit, right? And I was getting ready to go for it, and one of the teachers walked outside of the classroom and said, "If you touch him, we will send you home." I said, "But he started it. It does not matter. If you touch him, we will send you home because you are the perpetrator." Which said an awful lot to me in terms of what the school felt about my presence here. And at that point, I had to make a really important decision. And that decision was, do I hit him and the teacher? But do I hit him or do I back off and stay? And at 17, you know, that's a difficult time. It's a difficult decision to make because he had talked about my mama. And I made the decision to back off. And I think for me that was the beginning of a very important lesson. And that lesson was, and I think is very applicable even today, is that you pick and choose the battles for which you want to stand. And I realized that if I chose to become like him in terms of behavior, then everything that had gone on and my presence would not mean anything. And so I chose not to respond. And that for me was one of the turning points. There was a man named John Casper, I think that was his name, who considered himself a traveling segregationist. And his intent was to go from city to city where desegregation was occurring and to try to convince people to become anti-desegregation. And he would tell people what to do. And so whenever he came to town, I knew that there would be thumbtacks in my seat, that people would walk by and dump ink and everything else over my books. And so I always felt a little unsafe during those times. And there was rock throwing. I couldn't ride. For example, my mother would pick me up outside, and people going by in the school bus sometimes would throw rocks at the car. And I remember once my mother went over and said to the police, "You know, they're throwing rocks. Can't you do something?" And his response to her was, "I didn't see anything." And so we were pretty much left on our own in terms of any type of security. So I finished my year here. And I left North Carolina and went to Worcester, Massachusetts to college. It was Clark University. And that was very interesting because I was under the impression that segregation was a Southern thing, that people in the North didn't do things like that. And that was why I went north. You know, I'm going to get away from segregation and I'm going to this place and it's going to be fantastic. Well, I get to Clark University, and at that time they had maybe 2,000 students or more. And in the class that I came in, there were 3 black females. Well, that wasn't so bad because, at least there's somebody else, right? So we all get roommates, and one of the young ladies had a roommate who was from New York, but who told us very emphatically, I don't like niggas. And she would not sleep in the room with her roommate. She slept in the bathroom in the tub. Dumb, yeah. And our thing was, let her sleep in the bathroom in the tub. So that was my first introduction to the fact that these things were not Southern things in and of themselves. But I think had I not been at Grimsley for that year, I probably would not have made it there for that time period. I was only there for 2 years, and I don't think I would have made it had I not had the experience of what it was like to be in a place where people didn't like you. And so that is sort of where I am with my life.